It began with a sound no parent ever wants to hear, the sound of silence. The kind that lingers too long after you've called your child's name. The kind that turns from confusion to fear, then to something much darker. 4-year-old Gus Lamont was last seen playing in the yard outside his grandmother's home in the Australian outback, a place his family considered safe, familiar, and full of life. But on that warm afternoon, safety turned into loss. Within minutes, Gus was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions that continue to haunt investigators, his family, and an entire nation. The disappearance of Gus Lamont is one of the most emotionally charged mysteries in recent years, a case that has forced Australia and the world to confront uncomfortable truths about how children slip through the cracks of safety, about how fast a moment of comfort can become a lifetime of regret. What happened to Gus Lamont? Who was watching that day? And why, months later, does the story still feel incomplete, as if someone out there knows far more than they're willing to say? According to early police reports, it was a sunny Saturday morning when Gus's mother dropped him off at his grandmother's property on the edge of a rural community near Mount Isa. The family had plans to spend the weekend together, simple plans, a barbecue, an afternoon walk, some quiet time away from city life. But around 10:45 a.m., when Gus's grandmother went inside to answer a phone call, the boy was playing near the garden with his small red toy truck. Less than 10 minutes later, when she stepped back outside, he was gone. No noise, no struggle, just silence and the faint sound of wind moving through the dry grass. Within hours, local authorities launched a massive search. Helicopters scanned the desert landscape, drones, dogs, and hundreds of volunteers spread out across the property line. The terrain, rough, uneven, and isolated, made the search nearly impossible, yet the community refused to stop. For 3 straight days, they combed through miles of bushland hoping to find any sign of the boy. A footprint, a shirt, anything. But by the 4th day, officials were forced to admit what no one wanted to hear. There were no leads, no clues, no direction. As media attention grew, the story of little Gus captured the world's empathy. His face, wide-eyed and full of innocence, was splashed across newspapers and social media feeds. People demanded answers. How could a 4-year-old vanish in broad daylight, surrounded by family? How does a child simply disappear from an open yard? And why were investigators struggling to establish even a basic timeline of what happened after 10:45 that morning? Weeks later, frustration began to replace hope. Critics accused the authorities of moving too slowly. Locals questioned why search teams had waited until nightfall to bring in heat-sensing equipment. Others pointed to missed opportunities. A report from a truck driver who thought he saw a small boy near a roadside rest area that same afternoon wasn't followed up for almost 36 hours. That delay, many now say, may have been critical. And then a new layer emerged, one that made the case even more complicated. Media outlets began publishing stories about the Lamont family's background, particularly focusing on the people closest to Gus. His mother, described by friends as quiet but fiercely protective. His grandmother, a well-known figure in the community who had recently been through a very public transition and faced local gossip because of it. Some of that attention was cruel, even prejudiced, painting the family as different. But while the headlines grew louder, the facts remained few. The investigation, still without evidence of foul play, was becoming clouded by public speculation and judgment rather than progress. Behind closed doors, however, detectives were re-examining every detail, from cell tower data to dashcam footage on nearby highways. They discovered inconsistencies in the timeline. A neighbor claimed they saw a vehicle parked by the property gate around the same time Gus disappeared. The car, a dark blue sedan with tinted windows, had never been linked to anyone in the area. Despite an appeal for witnesses, no one came forward to claim ownership. Police believe it could be connected, but without a license plate or a clear image, it remains a shadow in an already confusing picture. By the 3rd week, frustration was beginning to turn into distrust. Online groups dedicated to finding Gus had tens of thousands of members, but what began as collective compassion quickly turned into chaos. Accusations spread. Unverified tips flooded law enforcement hotlines. People dissected every photo, every interview, every gesture from Gus's family. It became a spectacle, one where empathy slowly gave way to entertainment, and the suffering of a family became a public guessing game. And yet, in the middle of all this noise, one small discovery reignited hope. About a month after Gus went missing, a team of volunteers found a fragment of fabric, red, faded, and half buried under dry soil roughly 2 kilometers from the property. It was later confirmed to be consistent with the shirt Gus was wearing that day. But the forensic testing was inconclusive, too degraded to extract DNA. Even so, for her mother, it was the first tangible piece of her son from the moment he vanished. She said, "At least it means he was there, somewhere. He was still close." Her words broke millions of hearts, a mother still holding on to a thread of hope, while the system around her seemed to be losing faith. Months passed, and official search efforts were scaled back. The police insisted the case remained open, but resources were limited. And then, just as the story seemed to fade from national headlines, new information surfaced, information that could change everything. Detectives recently revealed that they've uncovered new leads in the Gus Lamont investigation, evidence that may finally explain what happened in those missing minutes. Authorities have not released details publicly, but sources close to the case claimed that a breakthrough came after the analysis of digital data, including phone records and possible CCTV footage that hadn't been reviewed properly during the initial phase. One senior officer, speaking under condition of anonymity, described it as something that should have been found earlier. That single statement has raised difficult questions. How much was overlooked? How much could have been prevented? And what would the investigation look like now if critical evidence hadn't been buried under procedural delays? This new phase of the case has reignited public debate, not only about Gus's disappearance, but how the system handles child abduction investigations, particularly in rural or remote regions. Critics argue that small police departments lack the technology and training needed to manage complex, fast-moving cases. Others say the media's obsession with drama over detail often misleads the public and distracts from what really matters, finding the truth. At the heart of all this remains one family, trapped in a cycle of grief, attention, and unanswered questions. Gus's mother continues to post daily messages online, pleading for updates, thanking strangers for their prayers, and confronting those who accuse her of involvement. Her exhaustion is visible. Her words, raw and unfiltered, reveal a woman fighting not only for her child, but for her own dignity. Meanwhile, police have confirmed they are examining the role of several individuals who were near the area at the time of the disappearance. One man previously ruled out as a suspect has reportedly reappeared in the investigation following new forensic reviews. His connection to the Lamont family remains unclear. Detectives are also working with a digital analyst to trace online communications linked to the area that morning, including any messages or location data that might connect to known offenders. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this case is what it says about collective responsibility. When a child goes missing, it's not just a family that suffers. It's a mirror held up to society itself. It shows how quickly we turn compassion into criticism, how easily suspicion replaces solidarity. It shows how we often demand justice without understanding how fragile it truly is. As investigators move forward, one thing is clear. The Gus Lamont case is far from over. New searches are being planned near water sources within a 10-kilometer radius of the last confirmed sighting. Forensic teams are expected to re-examine older evidence using updated methods. And experts from overseas have been called in to assist, suggesting authorities are finally treating this case with the urgency it deserved from the beginning. You have to wonder, if these efforts had been made 6 months ago, would the outcome be different? Would Gus be home by now? Would we even be telling this story today? Those questions hang heavy in the air, and perhaps they always will. As we continue to follow this unfolding investigation, we urge you to stay tuned. And if you haven't already, subscribe for updates. Because stories like this remind us that truth takes time, and justice requires persistence. Somewhere out there, the answers exist. And for the sake of a 4-year-old boy who never made it home, those answers must be found. Late last night, investigators expanded their search perimeter again, this time focusing on a narrow corridor of land running between 2 abandoned properties, roughly 7 kilometers from where the original search ended. For months, that area had been dismissed as irrelevant, but a new lead, described as credible and data-driven, pushed authorities back there in full force. The tip reportedly came from digital mapping of movement patterns collected through aerial surveillance, a method that wasn't available during the initial search months ago. Technology, once limited by time and bureaucracy, is now helping retrace steps that should have been followed from day one. Teams are said to be working quietly, away from cameras, combing through patches of dry brush and shallow waterbeds. What exactly they're looking for remains undisclosed, but their renewed focus has caught attention at the highest levels. Officials from both the state and federal police have now joined the task force, and internal communication logs suggest coordination between multiple departments, a rare move that signals both urgency and frustration. Behind the scenes, sources close to the case describe tension, the kind that builds when truth begins to surface and accountability becomes unavoidable. There are whispers that miscommunication between local law enforcement and state authorities may have caused delays during the first critical 48 hours, delays that cannot be undone. In the realm of missing persons investigations, that window, the first 2 days, often determines everything that follows. When it's missed, you don't just lose time, you lose clarity, you lose trust. It's impossible to ignore the unease spreading among the public. What began as sympathy has turned into something heavier, a quiet anger aimed at the system itself. Every parent watching this story sees a reflection of their own worst fear. Every community leader is reminded that safety isn't just a word, it's a responsibility. How many times have we told ourselves this kind of thing doesn't happen here? How many warnings have been brushed aside until tragedy forces us to care? Meanwhile, new footage has surfaced, grainy, distant, but important. Security video from a farm supply store on the outskirts of town, time-stamped just before noon on the day of the disappearance, appears to show a small child walking beside an adult whose face is obscured by a hat. The pair cross a service road and disappear behind a line of vehicles. Analysts are now enhancing the footage to determine if the child could be Gus. The resemblance, while uncertain, has reignited debate about whether the boy left the property willingly or under the impression that he was with someone he knew. Detectives have reportedly tracked the vehicle seen in that footage, a dark blue sedan, to a rental agency in another district. Records show it was leased under a temporary name with incomplete identification. The person responsible has yet to be found. Authorities have appealed to the public again, urging anyone who might have seen that car to come forward. But weeks of media exposure have left many skeptical. People question whether new information will truly be acted upon or buried under red tape like so many tips before. And as the investigation deepens, another question begins to form, one that many are too afraid to ask out loud. Was this case ever handled correctly from the beginning? It's a question that now sits at the center of the national conversation, forcing uncomfortable discussions about accountability, leadership, and what happens when human error intersects with tragedy. Sources inside the command center described quiet frustration. Some officers reportedly believe the case was mishandled due to pressure from above, while others insist every possible measure was taken. But as files resurface and inconsistencies appear, the narrative grows harder to control. A confidential report leaked earlier this week revealed that a search drone malfunctioned during one of the earliest aerial sweeps. The malfunction went unreported for days. That small oversight might have left entire sections of land unchecked, areas now, ironically, being revisited as potential sites of evidence. The deeper this investigation goes, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just a story about one missing child. It's a story about what happens when trust fractures, when procedures replace compassion, when decisions are made for convenience instead of conscience. It's about every family that's ever been told to wait, every mother forced to believe that help is on the way when in truth, the system is already failing behind the scenes. Community volunteers are back on the ground again, led by independent search coordinators. Many of them were part of the first search, and they remember what was missed, the tracks that were dismissed, the voices that weren't heard. One volunteer described it plainly. We were told to stop looking too soon. Something never felt right. That statement, echoed by others, paints a troubling picture of how control and caution might have stood in the way of discovery. As daylight fades, the search zone grows quieter, but hope, fragile as it is, still lingers. Psychologists working with the Lamont family have said that hope becomes a survival mechanism in cases like this. It's what keeps parents awake at night, scrolling through forums, replaying interviews, examining every detail again and again. It's what prevents them from giving in to despair. For Gus's family, hope is both their strength and their curse. Authorities have confirmed that specialized cadaver dogs are being deployed again, though officials refuse to clarify whether this is standard protocol or based on new intelligence. Their silence has sparked speculation across newsrooms and online communities. People want answers. They want to know if this renewed search means closure is near, or if it's simply another loop in an endless circle of uncertainty. At this stage, every revelation brings both relief and resentment. Relief that the investigation is alive again, resentment that it took this long for momentum to return. Every missed lead feels heavier now. Every delay feels personal. The public isn't just following a mystery anymore, they're witnessing the slow unraveling of faith in the institutions meant to protect. Late this evening, an internal document surfaced detailing coordination between local law enforcement and national cybercrime analysts. That connection raised eyebrows. What does cybercrime have to do with a missing child in a remote area? Insiders claim the team is investigating possible online communications linked to the days surrounding the disappearance, encrypted messages, anonymous accounts, conversations that might suggest someone was planning or observing events connected to the case. None of it has been confirmed, but the implications are unsettling. It suggests that what happened to Gus may have roots extending far beyond the boundaries of one small town. Every development in this case seems to reveal another layer of oversight, another moment when someone, somewhere, could have done more. And maybe that's the hardest part to confront, the realization that tragedy often doesn't stem from one big mistake, but from 1,000 small ones, each one seemingly harmless until they align. As night falls over the investigation site, searchlights cut across the barren landscape. Investigators move carefully, their steps measured, their faces unreadable. Somewhere out there lies a clue, a missing connection that could change everything. And maybe, just maybe, the silence that started this story will finally begin to break. Stay tuned for updates as we continue to track this unfolding investigation. Subscribe if you want to follow every new lead as it emerges, because the search isn't just about finding a missing child anymore. It's about understanding how we let this happen in the first place.